Today's recording is about helping the community manage the uncertainties during the coronavirus pandemic. We will focus on the topic of mental health awareness and well-being self-care tips to help us navigate through these tricky waters. My name is Amila Kay, and today we have Professor David Forbes, the Director of Phoenix, Australia at the Department of Psychiatry, University of Melbourne. David is an international expert in post-traumatic stress disorder and a clinical psychologist with extensive experience in the assessment and treatment of mental health problems following trauma. Thank you for your time today, David. How are you?
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much, Mel.
So, David, given your background in disaster and trauma-related mental health, how do you see some of the mental health issues that might be occurring across the community at the moment?
Look, I think there's a level of apprehensiveness and concern and uncertainty across the Australian community, given the events that are occurring and the fact that there are no boundaries, so to speak, in terms of the impacts. And the things are unfolding on a daily and weekly basis, really, in terms of what the new rules are about how we go about living our lives. So I think that is occurring more broadly across the community. But the one thing I guess we know around our experience in trauma and disaster-related mental health, and it has some similarities to disaster in some respects, particularly in that, those that are more closely affected or more significantly impacted by the event are also likely to carry a bigger burden in terms of the mental health impact as well. So, for example, in fire and floods, there are those that are more significantly impacted than others. So we expect to see the mental health impact greater there as well. And also in disasters more broadly, like bushfires or floods, there's the flow-on effects that occur, which is home being demolished and needing to be rebuilt, loss of community structures, a job, and there's the financial stresses that flow on secondarily. And here within the pandemic, we've got both of those elements really, which is those that are more closely affected to the pandemic itself, either being affected by COVID, caring for someone who's affected by COVID, or potentially having lost someone affected by COVID, or on the front line of services who are more directly impacted. And then the secondary effects is those as a result of really important life-saving restrictions around social distancing. Some of the consequences, though, around loneliness, isolation on one hand, and also potentially around being in environments that are kind of risks around escalations in family violence. And the second part of that process is the financial instability and the economic impacts that flow in terms of people's employment and loss of employment. So I think the degree to which your mental health is impacted depends on how close you are to those changes, both in terms of the pandemic and also the flow-on effects.
Yeah. Amazing things that you've brought up there, Dave. And I guess that kind of really links in nicely to my next question, which is for people who say have never really experienced any crisis before or haven't really experienced mental health challenges in the past and maybe are now feeling a little bit more worried or down in their mood, how can we identify if we're stressing in a normal range or if maybe now it's time to talk to someone?
Thanks. And I think that this is an issue that we see also in disasters more generally, which is the reality is that often people who haven't necessarily experienced mental health problems before can experience them for the first time, and that can be unsettling and sometimes even hard for them to be able to recognise it. Some of the early warning signs, if you like, around people starting, one is the usual uncertainty, but then when we start to see things like changes in appetite, changes in sleep, not being able to sleep so well, irritability, with feeling like you're starting to want to withdraw from other people or starting to not see people even when you can, or communicate with others even when you can, using more alcohol than you might otherwise. So some of the being irritable, some of those things are the early signs of potentially a problem starting to creep up. And we encourage people, if they've kind of identify those issues in themselves, or identify those in others, to be able to support them and reach out to them before it runs the risk of starting to escalate into something more serious.
Yeah.
Importantly, most people are resilient and will recover using their natural coping strategies, but we do need to keep an eye on those kinds of signs to make sure they don't escalate.
Yeah. So would you say that, because we might notice some of these things, like there's changes going on, would you say that noticing maybe how long they last, or in terms of like how much it's impacting our day-to-day life, that then we can be like, oh, hang on a second.
Absolutely. How much of the time am I feeling this way? How strongly am I feeling it? And is it disrupting what I'm trying to do and my functioning? If I'm working from home, is it starting to interfere with my work? Is it starting to interfere with the way that I'm talking to people,
Yeah.
family, friends, in any way, shape or form? So when you also start to see it interfering with your functioning. So it is about those three things exactly, which is how often, how strong, and how much it is impacting on your functioning, and trying to get in early where that's the case.
Yep. I'm definitely feeling like that's an important thing to highlight, is identifying those things in ourselves. Like you said, especially if it's not something we're used to experiencing, so it's completely unknown to us, uncharted waters. So I think that will be really helpful for a lot of people, David. So across the community, what are some of the ways that people can not only stay well, but also cope through the changes that have taken place in the recent weeks? I'm thinking, like you said, the loss of social interaction, our changes in work environment. People are working from home now, maybe not working at all, and then of course how that would help make people struggle with their financial circumstances.
Sure. Look, there's probably 5 things, and this isn't necessarily going to kind of reach everybody. And for each individual circumstance, there's probably more detailed things that we might be able to suggest. But generally, we suggest 5 things to help people stay as well mentally well, and maintain good mental health and well-being. So one is just simple self-care, which is things like exercise, eating well, and trying to sleep well. And some of the things I'm saying can sound trite, they can sound superficial, but we know in fact that these things, after even disasters, can make a big difference in mental health and well-being. So there's the self-care. There's things also like trying to make sure that you do something that you enjoy. One of the first things that happens, if in these circumstances, that people are either with a change of routine, stop doing things that are fun, or if they're around people who are experiencing difficulty, feeling like it's not okay to do fun things, or themselves, if they're suffering and experiencing distress, not feeling like they want to do fun things. Really important is ensuring that we continue to do things that are enjoyable, at least one thing a day that gives us pleasure, because these things are important in maintaining well-being. Things like setting a routine. At the moment, the whole world is changing in relation to the patterns of work, whether you're talking about working from home, the way we have contact with others, family and friends. So getting some sense of predictability and control back by making a plan, and trying to give yourself a bit of a set routine for the day. Another part is really around what you do with your thinking, which is there's plenty of scope. There's often enough problems in one day to focus your attention on that one day. The risk is in terms of an environment like this, where we've got lots of time on our hands, we can start to be thinking about what about tomorrow, what about the day after, what about this, what about that, and start to load ourselves up with worries and fears about the future and all manner of scenarios that may or may not occur. So really important is trying to pick that up early and try to keep your thinking focused on what do I need to do today, or problem solve tomorrow, but not worry too much about potential. Try and let go of building on that worries about future scenarios that may or may not occur, because they can overwhelm us. We can overwhelm ourselves, and that worries turns into very severe anxiety. The last thing is around social connections. Social connections and social connectedness are the most important thing we have in terms of maintaining mental health and well-being generally after stress and after disaster. So making sure that we stay connected with others, although we are physically distant from each other, maintaining social connections is really important, both at a community end, but also personally, is reaching out to people who you care about and who care about you.
Yeah, I love everything that you just shared there. And earlier on, when you were talking about routines, and you were saying they might sound trite and maybe simple, but I often think sometimes it's the simplest of things that have the greatest impact on us as human beings. It's those little changes that we can make that can really make for a huge difference in our life.
Absolutely, because they are simple and we do them on a day-to-day basis, which means they kind of operate as a bit of a brake for us, like a handbrake in a car, really. When we find that we're starting to roll down a certain pathway where we're becoming distressed or becoming more anxious, little things like that can actually just stop and correct. People do this in their day-to-day lives all the time, but what we're experiencing at the moment is people feel that some of those, under these different sets of circumstances, some of the basic things they do to keep themselves well kind of go a bit by the wayside. So it's a
Mm.
good time to remind ourselves the things that keep you well under usual stress. Good reminder to apply these things now.
Oh, excellent. Very good reminder. And so I guess that brings me to, how does something like the COVID-19 pandemic impact the way we see our world and maybe our reality right now?
Look, it's an interesting question, really, and what we see in the context of trauma and disaster generally is where it challenges the way we see the world, the sense of the world as a predictable place, a controllable place, where if we do X and Y, Z's going to happen, and we know how society works, and then trauma comes and changes all the rules on us. And it's a little bit like that now, really, which is that, you know, we're facing an environment that our generations haven't seen. Um, uh, Changes in behaviour and how things unfold is unfolding in a way that is a little bit unpredictable, and we're not quite sure where it ends and what the parameters are, and it affects the way we work, the way we socialise, the way we think, what our family life looks like. Affects our financial stability and our financial predictability. So trauma, it's similar to trauma in terms of it really challenges these fundamental assumptions. So that's on the one hand. Sitting alongside that is also that sometimes when our views of the world get challenged, we tend to see things in a different way, what we call kind of post-traumatic transformation or post-traumatic growth, which is in circumstances now, for example, people working from home, not traveling as much or at all, time's slowing down for many people. So they're getting the chance to think about things they hadn't thought about before, chance to reflect on things perhaps that they hadn't reflected on before, spending closer time with the family that they're living at home with, playing family board games where that would never have happened before as well, and just being able to appreciate life by the moment and by the day, rather than living life in a blur by the weeks, months and years. So I think what we see alongside both the difficulties around the challenges to our worldview is also an opportunity to reset, in some respects, the way we're starting to see life, and the chance to reflect on who and what we are and how we live our lives. And both of those things can co-occur.
At the same time. Yeah. Really interesting points there, David. Thank you. And I'm thinking now about, so all of these changes that are happening, and there's this tendency to, I don't know about, I'm sure there are a lot of people out there and I can't be the only one, but there's this tendency for our mind to run miles, days ahead of where we are today and trying to figure out problems that aren't problems yet. And I'm wondering, what are some of the things that we can do or techniques that can help bring us back in this moment and focus on today and maybe tomorrow, but more today?
So look, I think it's a really good question. I mentioned before about the fact that we can pile worries on ourselves, really,
Yeah.
And overwhelm ourselves. So the first part is simple in just recognizing this. Recognizing that with lots of time on our hands and lots of uncertainty and lots of potential challenges, there is this potential for us to do worry upon worry in relation to all manner of scenarios. So one, acknowledging the potential for this and recognizing, am I doing it? The second part, and again, this isn't a solve all for all, and this is just ideas for playing with at this point. The second part is just even starting to identify when you're doing it, and pulling yourself up if you can. Say, oh, look, I'm starting to worry a bit about the future. Today, I'm just going to try and focus on today. And I'm just going to do what I've got to do in front of me. I might plan for tomorrow, I might organise something for tomorrow, but I'm just going to try and pull myself up on seeing if I can stop myself do that. So aware of when you're doing it and pulling yourself up. The third bit is then after that, doing something practical, no matter how trivial, whether it's making a coffee or whether it's going to a computer or whatever it is that you're doing, to do it and focus on it fairly intently, which is to really try and absorb yourself in the moment and the activity that you're engaging in. Ground yourself in that activity as much as possible. One, it's a good distraction from the worry, but two, also, it just really helps to ground you and to ground your thinking away from the worry and towards the present moment, and just noticing what it's like to be making that cup of coffee, what it smells like, what it feels like with the heat around the cup, and what that coffee tastes like. And just for a moment, let yourself be immersed in that experience. And those things together, just acknowledging it, noticing when you're doing it and trying to pull yourself up, and then doing something grounding in the present moment can be really important first step strategies in trying not to let our thinking run away with us.
Yeah, what an inspiring and helpful technique that we can easily apply, most of us. We don't have to go anywhere. We can do it right now, right here. And I'm sure all the coffee lovers of Australia will easily love that example, David.
I'm showing my bias with coffee here, but
and I guess now that brings us towards the end. So is there anything that you would like to leave our listeners with today, David? And actually, I'd really love it if you would touch on something to speak to the people who are living alone at the moment, and maybe add in something there about how they can be supported during this time.
look, I think that that's a really critical thing, which is we've talked a lot about how you look after yourself. The reality is there are a number of people who are experiencing this alone. And really important for us all to be thinking about who they might be within our networks and reaching out to them, not waiting for them to reach out to you. And also not making assumptions about who might and might not be experiencing difficulties. The reality is this is new and challenging times for everybody, and not making assumptions about who might need a hand and who not. If you think someone does, definitely reach out. But if you think that someone usually travels well, reach out to them anyway, particularly if they're alone. Because people can experience this in all different ways. So I think it really behoves us to make sure we don't leave anyone behind in this process.
Yeah, I love that. We're all in this together, aren't we?
Indeed.
And so, David, where is a good place for people to go now and get some reliable information about what's happening during COVID-19 without maybe having to watch the news and too much media, which can be a source of anxiety for some people?
So certainly the Commonwealth Department of Health website, the COVID Help website, the state health departments in each of the respective states has really good up-to-date information around COVID, so really good trusted sources. And of course around managing mental health and wellbeing, is our website, Phoenix Australia, Beyond Blue website, Black Dog website, all good trusted sources of information.
Excellent, thank you. And I'll be sure to add those in the description notes for people to access. So thank you for your time today, David. It's incredible, valuable insights that you've shared with us today. And that's it from us this week. And we look forward to next week's conversation.
Thanks very much, Emma.